Hi, I'm Rob Price, and it's great to be back for a new season. Welcome to Futurize.
Hello, I'm Steve Bustin. I'm a public speaking coach and event MC through my business Get Your Voice Heard, but I'm also the National Chair of the Hardy Plant Society, which is the UK's largest specialist plant group with around 5,000 members, 41 local groups, 7 special interest groups, 3 national publications, and an awful lot more besides. So I have interests in sort of the business world, but also in the gardening and charity world.
And I have to ask Steve, how did you get that then? How did you get involved? How did that come to be?
In terms of the Hardy Plant Society, I was approached, I was asked, but I've been a member for 16, 17 years.
Yeah.
But about 2 years ago, the then chair put out an appeal saying that the charity was becoming very short of trustees to a point of being sort of legally problematic. So a number of us put our hands up and said, be interested in being a trustee. I wasn't sat on any boards at the time. And then actually my predecessor as chair contacted me and said, look, we've looked at your background and we've looked at your LinkedIn profile and what you've done. Would you be interested in taking on the role of the chair? So after a certain amount of umming and ahhing and thinking about it, I did say yes.
Fantastic. So for everyone else who's listening, I too have been a member of a variety of different plant-based organisations. It's a passion. God knows how many years as a member of things like NCCPG and Alpine Garden Society and RHS, and indeed inherited, if that's the right word, my Hardy Plant Society membership from my mother, who passed away a couple of years ago. So I have a view in terms of how amazing the societies can be in terms of sharing of knowledge and fellow people with kind of similar passions. But I also know some of the challenges of those. I mean, I remember sitting on a committee in my 20s, and I was probably 50 years younger than most of the others on that particular committee. So tell us a bit more about the Hardy Plant Society and some of the things that you think you need to help make happen in terms of ensuring its longer term sustainability.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you don't even have to be in your 20s to be younger than the rest of the members. I'm aware. I mean, I'm about to turn 55, and I was brought in as young blood, which tells you quite a lot. And yeah, the Hardy Plant Society, in common with most garden societies, has an ageing membership. The RHS, the Royal Horticultural Society, has recognised this and has actually been doing a certain amount of consultation and research into the societies and how we can make sure that they survive. Because I think there's about 70 something specialist plant groups registered with the Royal Horticultural Society, of which the Hardy Plant Society is quite by some margin the largest. But the issue is, these societies, most of them have been around for decades. We hit our 70th anniversary next year, and when they were set up, clearly, the internet wasn't even on the horizon. I mean, you learnt your gardening orally on the whole. You learnt it from your neighbour or the person on the allotment next to yours. So the idea of being able to go somewhere to learn more about particular groups of plants as well as general gardening, I'm sure was very appealing. So the Hardy Plant Society was set up by 4 people who wanted to celebrate the hardy plant and to encourage people to grow them and to raise awareness of them and educate people about the strength of hardy plants. And one of the joys of hardy plants is they come back every year. And hopefully they'll come back bigger and better every year. So there's a lot to celebrate. Interestingly, the Hardy Plant Society has probably the broadest remit of all the plant societies that are there. A lot of them are really niche. The Alpine Plant Society or the Australia and New Zealand Plant Society, or there are the ferns and there are the orchids, and even within the Hardy Plant Society we have a Galanthus group, we have a Ranunculaceae group, we have some really quite specialist groups sort of under the HPS umbrella. But the problem is those conversations across the garden fence or across the allotment fence aren't really happening anymore. Allotmenteering is very popular, and yes, people can still learn from their neighbours, but the oral tradition of passing on gardening knowledge, gardening expertise, and also passing on seeds and plants and tools and all that sort of stuff has sort of gone by the wayside. There has been a resurgence in recent years. Things like there's now a lot of seed swaps. So here in Brighton we have CD Sunday. In Lewis, just up the road in East Sussex, they have CD Saturday, and I know those take place across the country. And that's sort of starting to try to fill some of that gap. But the issue we have is we have an ageing membership. And the new generation of gardeners, the idea of going to a village hall on a Sunday afternoon and watching a talk and having a nice piece of cake is an anathema. It's not how they learn anymore. They turn to Instagram and YouTube and things like that, and that's a real challenge. So there's no easy answer. And a lot of the plant societies are really struggling, and I suspect we'll lose. Well, in fact, I think we've lost some already, but I'm sure we're going to lose more, because they've really struggled to engage with a younger audience and with modern communication technologies.
Is that the gap though? Because in a sense, I've seen and look, for centuries, you've always had these cycles of plant interests, haven't you? Kind of one moment it's tulips and then snowdrops
Yeah,
and
yeah,
whatever it might be. And there are, I see it online on Facebook. There are passionate groups of people younger around succulents, for example. There seems to be a surge in things like Echeveria and
yeah. Houseplants.
Aeoniums.
Yeah,
Yeah,
houseplants
houseplants.
suddenly massively fashionable again, having gone completely out of fashion for best part of 30 years.
So is it that the two groups of people kind of maybe haven't quite worked out how to communicate together? So they are out
Yeah,
there. It's just that, as you say, they interact and learn in different ways.
yeah, completely. I mean, the boom in houseplants was driven largely by Instagram and to an extent TikTok. Um, and then and I think it's taken a lot of older plant growers completely by surprise. It took a lot of nurseries by surprise, and there are some really good nurseries who jumped on that one very fast. And as you say, succulents very fashionable, and all plants go in and out of fashion. Although it's funny, the one that never seems to come quite back into fashion is chrysanthemums. Dahlias have go in and out of fashion certainly. But chrysanthemums seem to struggle. They've always been tarnished with that garage forecourt image, haven't they? There's definitely fashion, and that plays a part. But I think it's about the way people seek out information now and how they seek knowledge. And where once they would have gone to their elders, if you like, or the more experienced person that they had contact with, now they can just go to ChatGPT, Google, Claude, wherever they want to go, and ask that question and get really high quality information on the whole, and videos to watch to see how they're going to do it and all this sort of stuff. I think there is a danger of expertise being lost, because we have got what I think is in danger of being lost are the real specialists.
Yes.
Yes, there are specialists in houseplants, there are specialists in Echeveria, in succulents, in Aeoniums, all these sorts of things. But I think a lot of the danger is a lot of that expertise is held by people for whom the digital world is not necessarily their comfort zone. And I think there's a real issue in terms of capturing knowledge, capturing expertise, and also capturing, I was going to say old wives' tales. That's not correct. Or folklore. The gardening adages and approaches, and try this, and here's a little tip you might not know, and those little secrets and those little sort of hacks and things. And that's the thing. If you call it a hack, suddenly that's very social media friendly. But it's being passed on in a way that is actually not necessarily going to make a great Instagram post.
But I think the problem that I see with things like ChatGPT is, and okay, kind of massive amount of knowledge at hand, but the answer is more nuanced in many cases. I mean, what grows well in one environment is no guarantee whatsoever that it grows in another, because the soil's different and the climate's different, and kind of it's more or less shady, and kind of the other things that grow with it impact it, etc. So it's that nuance for me that's the thing that how do we retain that?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And also, so much of it is changing. So hardiness, as the Hardy Plant Society, a lot of it's around, plants that are considered to be hardy. And the first question is almost, what is a hardy plant? And it's at the simplest term, it's a plant that will survive winter. But I mean, there are different degrees of hardiness down to -5, -14, all this sort of stuff. But, I'm based on the south coast. I'm in Brighton. Plants that are hardy for me will not be hardy for somebody gardening in Yorkshire or Scotland. Although, interestingly, if you're on the west coast of Scotland, there's lots of things that you can grow there that even I can't grow here, because you've got the Gulf Stream and all that sort of stuff. So that's what ChatGPT misses, is that nuance of hardiness or climate and things. And clearly the climate is changing. And I know there are people who a few years ago would never have left dahlias in the ground, for example. Now quite happy to do so. A bit of mulch, quite happy to do so, because their winters are mild. I mean, now if anything, the problem with dahlias is rot. I haven't yet had a dig around. I leave my dahlias in the ground. I suspect they're at grave danger of having rotted rather than having had any problems. I think we've had one frost this winter, and it wasn't even a particularly hard one.
Yeah,
So
I wouldn't risk it in my wet clay. Yeah.
no, okay, and that's the thing. But so it's interesting, isn't it? It's not just temperature; it is moisture, and that's it's funny. I've lost swathes of snowdrops because they've just been baked out of existence
Okay.
over the summers. Snowdrops are woodland plants and like damp or conditions in shade and things when they're underground over the summer. But I've lost a whole swathe of them because it was so hot, the ground dried out, the bulbs desiccated. So yeah, changing climate is a big part of it. So you see, there's also the expertise that is held has to be updated.
But it's so, I mean, I think one of the things that I see a lot on social media is because it's global, then it's quite hard to distinguish what's right for you where you are
Hmm.
because the advice becomes generic. I mean, the growing in the US or South Africa or China is different to growing here, even
Yeah,
if we're
very
talking
much.
about the same plant. So, um, I mean, to go back to your point around people learning different ways, I found it fascinating to watch my son over the last couple of years because he at 21 is kind of consuming lots of information around carnivorous plants, actually,
Hmm.
from YouTube, from wherever he can find it. And then he's connecting to the growers in the nurseries and has
Right.
got this deep expertise really quickly, but he's not doing it the way that I would have done it when I
Right.
was his age.
Yeah.
So what can we do to help this transition? So if we're talking to members across the Hardy Plant Society, or indeed any plant society in the UK or further afield, what can we practically do to gather and share and enable people to take on that nuance that we've been talking about?
Good question. I wish I had an easy answer. I don't think there is an easy answer. I think there is a lot of things around capturing that expertise, and a lot of it's actually interesting in old media. So we have the Hardy Plant Society has a journal which is now 3 times a year and is written largely by members, and is quite specialist. It's one of the more specialist plant publications out there, and is very well regarded as a result of that. And that actually is a good repository for information. And we do have archives going back 50 odd years of the Hardy Plant Journal. But of course, that's only available to members. And it's one of those things where it's like, how do we make that available in a way that doesn't just undermine the value of membership, but does give people a way to access that expertise? Certainly, I think getting people to write, getting people to record, is important, but getting people to share, I think, is the main one in whatever way they can. And if that is they give a talk that people can come and take notes at and learn from, then that I think is a really good step. But as I said, there is an issue here where younger gardeners don't necessarily want to go and listen to a talk, or it's at the wrong time of day for them if they've got young kids, and it's there is a real issue around fitting in that sort of education or that sort of information exchange into people's lives and lifestyles in a way that works for them.
And what I've seen, I mean, I have an enormous frustration, and in part I understand there are so many talks. And actually, if you look out there on Zoom or otherwise, many of the societies, the experts, members deliver talks.
Hmm.
Very few of them are recorded.
Yeah.
It's just not seemingly kind of liked as a concept, although that would make such a difference in terms of other people being able to consume it at a time convenient to them.
Yeah. Interestingly, we had an online lecture about 3 weeks ago from Tom Stewart Smith, and it's the first time we've done one that we've laid on a national basis. And we had 700 people attend, and then another pushing 300 people have watched it online. Now, Tom agreed for us to make it available online for a fortnight, but now that's been removed because that's the agreement. And I'm aware, I speak to garden groups. I mean, speaking is part of my profession as well, and I speak on business topics as well. And I have to be very careful about allowing people to record, because there are times you think, okay, am I undermining my own business? On the whole, I don't think I am, because I think if anything, people see some of my talks on YouTube, and I have quite an active YouTube channel, and actually that leads to people booking me. They see the recordings, like, oh, actually, can we get that live, please?
Yeah.
So, but I probably I'm a bit more. I don't want to say switched on because that suggests other people aren't switched on, but maybe I'm a bit more open-minded about those sorts of things. Do I think, if somebody recorded one of my garden talks, do I think that people are going to just play that video in a village hall rather than inviting me to speak? No, I don't think they are. They will they value the live experience, and it is one of the things that AI is never going to be able to replace is the live experience, and it's one of the things that I think will become seen as a premium product. So yeah, it's a tricky one. Some people are very, very nervous about their stuff being recorded because they see it as being use of their IP. If some of my talks are on my YouTube channel, certainly my business talks. If somebody wants to sit there and transcribe it and then learn it and deliver it, so be it. I think it's very unlikely to happen. And even then, it's my material. A lot of it's my stories about my life or my business or my garden or whatever. So I think it becomes tricky for somebody else to just replicate that. So I don't have a problem with putting my stuff out there. And I put out lots and lots of content on YouTube anyway. And it drives business for me.
I think there's, and I've seen this is a comment I've seen in business as well. I've seen deep experts in business who, it's their thing. That's how they've created their career. It cements their position.
Yeah.
And then I've had a conversation with them that said, yeah, but when you retire, what happens then? And they haven't always thought about handing on the baton to whoever comes next to be able to sustain whatever it is that they do within that business. Now, at the same time, I have seen so many people take such satisfaction from inspiring others to start collecting or start growing or solving particular problems. So it's not as though there's not a desire to help people.
No, absolutely.
Maybe it is just fear of the unknown, perhaps, and that uncertainty.
Yeah. Interestingly, because the social media particularly is still relatively new. 15, 20 years. 25 years, I suppose now. What happens when those creators either just stop creating or die? They actually do leave a digital archive. Now, that information, I suppose, will gradually, very slowly go out of date if it's gardening information, and also the algorithm will gradually bury it under the avalanche of new content that's always being created. But that is there, and it's one of the things we have yet to get our head around, I think, as a society, is digital archiving and how we save materials that are online only.
Nice.
What happens to some of those incredibly popular Instagram channels? When that creator is no longer around, does that content still stay there? Should it stay there? Should it come down? I don't know. It's interesting, I don't think that nobody's really got their heads around it yet. I know you can now on Facebook, for example, you can identify somebody in advance who can take over your account when you die and archive it or delete it or whatever. But I think there's a more nuanced approach to be had in terms of what content is worth saving, what content was ephemeral and can be deleted safely. And again, I'm not sure. And that, I think, is something that could AI ever make that judgment? Very probably. I
think the challenge there. So I'm in my study. I'm looking across at a bookcase full of gardening books over the last 100 years that have been published. But I'm not quite sure where they will go when I'm no longer here, because somebody has to have that passion to pick them up and retain it in that sense. Yeah. So I could say, well, surely all that content is at some stage uploaded to, I don't know, internet or an AI brain somewhere that enables any of us to access it. Surely that's the case with all the society journals. Over time, you would hope that they're, to use the AI term, ingested into a model or a knowledge graph from a terminology point of view that enables people to access that better. The big question for me is what's the commerciality of that? Because this is not a business. This is this is a societal passion for many people.
Yeah.
So it's not as though we're in a position where we're saying, hey, we can make lots of money from doing this thing, whilst at the same time many of us will say, but surely that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, for some people though, it is their business. The authors of those books, that is one of the ways they make a living. I know some people when they're giving garden talks, that is an important part of their income. And one has to respect that. And there's the whole thing about IP and respecting somebody's work. I think it is, it's one of the great conundrums at the heart of AI is the use of people's IP and the way that the models have learned. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned books. I'm just looking at my bookshelf to my right, and I have only got now about half a dozen garden books, if that. And I've jettisoned most of mine because I was never picking them up. I had some quite specialist ones, but again, I will open my laptop before I'd open a book. So now, those books have hopefully gone on to other people. They've hopefully, they've either been given to charity shops or sold on at Hardy Plant Society events. So hopefully other people are benefiting from the wisdom they contain. But yeah, I mean, the book world is struggling because, those sorts of books, coffee table books, maybe have a place. Informational books, they go out of date so fast. I have a couple of books, a couple of quite specialist ones. There's one somewhere I can't see it now about aeoniums because I'm a big aeonium fan. And a lot of the information in it is sort of out of date now, and it quotes nurseries that no longer exist and all this stuff thing. So it is, that is the problem with books. Is it's old media that dates very fast.
Well, part of me loves that capturing moments in time, though, to kind of actually know, because as you say, it changes, it evolves. I mean, they're called different things over the decades as well, which no doubt drives people mad as well. So how do we kind of help, and we as in kind of in the broadest sense?
Yeah.
Let's go back to the Hardy's Plant Society and the work that you and its members are doing.
Mm.
Do you look at and let's ask the question around AI. Do you look at that as something that could possibly help, or something that kind of people fear?
Within our current membership or within the gardening fraternity generally?
Within where you, I'll come back to. How do we get to a point where you've got sustainable knowledge and interest and the ability to pass on that passion through the generations?
Mm. That's a big question. Just to answer your AI question first, I think one of the issues we have is that certainly most of our membership and a large number of our board members and committee members and post holders and things are retired, and AI on the whole has come along since they retired, and I think most people, that's where their AI usage has come from, has been from the workplace. So I think there is a generation for whom AI, they just don't actually see the point. They don't feel the need to engage with it. And there have been, some people do find it very scary, and there have been lots of scare stories around it. And if people aren't necessarily educated about what it can and can't do, people do get slightly het up about it. And it's funny, I've used it for some small things. We used to have a newsletter called Seedlings, which originally was just called The Newsletter, and I'm sure we can come up with a better name for that. So I just stuck it into ChatGPT and said, give me some one-word titles for a newsletter for a garden society, and Seedlings was one of the ones that came up. It's like, yeah, great, we'll use that. And I mentioned in a board meeting that that was a ChatGPT suggestion, and some people really threw up their hands in horror. And it's like, well, how can that's awful. Why? How on earth can we use that? And it's like, well, why not? It's a good name. It works, And some people, I think, for some people, there is still a AI equals bad equation in place. We use AI minute takers now for board meetings. For major board meetings, we have a minute taker still, but for exec meetings and other smaller meetings, it's just done by an AI minute taker, which is very, very good. I mean, quite scarily good sometimes. In fact, sometimes I think the AI minutes are better than handwritten minutes because, a minute taker will, can only keep up to a certain pace. So AI, I think there is a generational thing that I think will take a while to move on. In the same way that, a lot of our members are not on Instagram. And I've been criticised for the fact that we concentrated our marketing over the last couple of years on Instagram. And people saying, but our members aren't on there. It's like, our members aren't, but I don't need to reach our members to market to them. I need to reach our future members who at the moment have never even heard of the Hardy Plant Society. And they're the people that we're marketing to on Instagram. I don't care if you don't see it. In fact, I sort of hope you don't, and people, it's taking people a while to get around that. So yeah, inevitably there is an inertia. There's a reluctance.
And I think that's entirely fair. I mean, there is clearly kind of a risk and a danger side of AI in the same sense of, and it can deliver value.
Yeah.
We've talked about that at great length on the podcast. We've talked about the concept of digital twins, where we're creating effectively, not quite downloading somebody's brain, but
Hmm.
capturing as much expertise from somebody as possible to then replay to people learning in a business environment so that you accelerate their learning. But I know that's a really sensitive topic, that there are people who would be horrified by that. And there are people that embrace it as a way of continuing the things that they're doing. Your point around different cohorts of people that you're trying to engage is, of course, absolutely. I recognise that everywhere. But what we're talking about is that overlap, because in a sense, how do we get from one generation to another generation? How do we get some degree of engagement to pass
Mm.
on? I suppose what we're looking for is, what does that future garden fence look like to kind of have the conversation across?
Yeah, yeah. And actually, that physical garden fence will always be important because you mentioned earlier, how do I know what will grow, and what will grow in different areas will grow differently. And you're on clay, I'm on chalk. One of the best ways to work out what's going to grow and to work out how to grow it is to look at what your neighbours are growing. I often say to people, if there are gardens open near you, go and visit them, because you'll start to get an idea for what grows in your climate, your soil. And also you can ask questions. And I have people. We open our garden in the National Garden Scheme, and it's fascinating. People come and going, "Oh, can I grow that in my garden?" It's like, "Well, are you local?" Yes. In which case, yeah, you can. And often, if I'll often have plants for sale, and I take cuttings and seeds and what have you from the garden. So I can say, "Oh, actually, if you're interested in growing that, there's one on the plant sale stand." So I'm like, yes, I share my knowledge and I share my plants and things like that. And I think there will always be a place for that. Even when you look at the major Instagram influencers around gardening, they're filming in their garden. They're filming doing things. They're filming with other people quite a lot.
Yeah,
They're not sat at a desk
yeah,
filming.
yeah.
And I think that, so I think that there is an absolute place for the garden fence or the allotment neighbour. And I hope that will never get lost, but it's hard to know.
It feels like that's the
What?
name of the podcast, actually, Over the Garden Fence, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose. I mean, that's the thing. Those sorts of relationships are easy and can be casual and occasional, or can be regular. They can become friendships, or it can just be an acquaintanceship sort of thing. But joining a group, going to a meeting, particularly on a Sunday afternoon in spring, when actually you'd much rather be on your allotment or in your garden, I think that's the bit that's going to struggle, is getting people to come along and sit and listen to a speaker, when they could be out there doing and learning at their own pace, and opening their phone and watching a quick video about how to take a cutting or how to pot on a seedling or whatever.
And I think, I mean, it comes back to other fantastic speakers, and there are less fantastic speakers,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
that's no indication of the depth of knowledge and know-how that they've got. And so there's almost this kind of disconnect between how people can engage and what they could ultimately get out. So
yeah.
I guess to finish, we never know who's listening to the podcast. So there's
Sure.
probably kind of some people out there who are fascinated and interested in the topic. If they kind of have got any ideas for some of the things that we've talked about, how
Hmm.
would they best get in touch with the Hardy Plant Society or yourself to kind of share some of those, uh, just on the off chance that out there is
Yeah.
the answer?
Absolutely, no, that's a very good point. The website is hardy-plant.org.uk. On there, you will find all the team members and our emails. But you could always email me at chair@hardy-plant.org.uk, or reach out. We are quite active on Instagram. Reach out there. Very happy to engage with people on Instagram. Slide into our DMs and we'll have a chat. We have. People can get hold of us hopefully fairly easily. I'd love to hear from people.
That's great, Steve. Thank you very much for joining.
You're very welcome.